Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. I'm Hallie Tecco.
I'm Michael Esquivel.
And I'm Steve Kraus. And every Monday, we bring you the latest in healthcare innovation as we sit down with entrepreneurs and industry experts.
So buckle up and join us as we figure out how to improve healthcare for all.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Heart of Healthcare. I am Steve Kraus, your host, and today I'm super excited to have a friend and Illuminati, shall I say, in the healthcare industry, Eric Larsen. Eric is the president of TowerBrook Advisors, which is a major private equity firm that invests in the healthcare industry. And prior to TowerBrook, served as a president emeritus at the advisory board company, where he was an executive for 25 years. So at one of the preeminent healthcare institutions there for 2 decades and a half, and then basically led that company as president until its acquisition of Optum. Eric, welcome to the Heart of Healthcare.
Steve, it's a privilege to be here. Big fan of the pod.
Thank you.
And privileged to be a pal of yours and the fun. So excited about this.
Likewise. So we could talk a lot with Eric about a lot of things because, as I mentioned, he's been in the industry for a long time and actually one of the most thoughtful, well-researched people in our industry. But what I want to talk about is we at Bessemer have been investing in health AI for, I think, 8 years now. And I get to read a lot of different thought leadership pieces and prose that are put out by lots of different folks. And I have to say, Eric, the piece that you put out, TowerBrook Advisors put out, is called the GenAI Juggernaut. U.S. healthcare is not prepared. Folks, this is 117 pages of prose, but I have to say it's the best piece I've read to date. So compliments to you. And I really want to dig in today because there's so many things that we can unpack. So let's start, if you don't mind, Eric. You call this GPT technology, which is general purpose technologies you define, and we'll talk about that, and the development of generative AI as the most powerful GPT ever. You call this the most important moment in history, and that U.S. healthcare has the greatest surface area exposure to Gen AI disruption. So let's start with how you define what a GPT is, and let's talk about why you think this is the most important moment in our country's history.
Yeah. So, Steve, I'm honored you read it. Evidently, I'm paid by the word. So brevity has never been my kind of strong suit. But look, I figured I'm going to defend that rather sort of grandiose statement that this is the most important moment in history. And I sort of titled the piece a little bit belligerently. I said, like, Gen AI juggernaut, U.S. healthcare is not prepared. And I did that. I was intentionally provocative because I do think that this particular GPT, general purpose technology, is the single most powerful technology humanity has ever created.
And Eric, can you describe for a second, what's the difference between a GPT and just a random innovation that you and I invest in the rest of our lives? Like, tell our listeners what the difference there is.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a Rorschach test. Like, I'll give you my definition, and various people have various interpretations of it. But I think about GPTs as these civilization shaping technologies that are sometimes singular, but most often they're like a drone swarm of innovational complementarities. And various academics think that over the 4,500 years of human civilization, dating back to the advent of writing, there probably been 20 to 25 of these civilization shaping technologies. And we know what these are, right? It's the advent of agriculture, animal husbandry, the wheel, the printing press, and then more recently, penicillin, the transistor, the microprocessor, the internet, et cetera. 25 that really shape economies, they shape societies, they have massive foreseen and unforeseen ramifications. And I think about human history as like, for a long time, to quote Hobbes, it was nasty, brutish, and short. And so at the very cusp of the first industrial revolution in the 1760s, there were 800 million humans on this planet. And 95% lived in abject poverty. Right. And then you had 4 industrial revolutions, right? So you had mechanization, electrification, informatization. I think this is the 4th and most consequential, agentification. But over that 250-year period, you went from 800 million to 8 billion people. You went from 95% impoverishment to 5%. And so technology has marked the upward swing of human flourishing and, defined as safety and literacy and sanitation and democracy. And the reason, Steve, I think this is the most powerful is that all of these GPTs were predominantly, over history, about magnifying human and animal musculature. They increased human power, ability to effectuate things in the real world. Toward the end of the 20th century, you started to see some technologies that magnified human cognition, low-level cognition, like the calculator and the spreadsheet. But these all amplified knowledge worker relevancy.
Right.
It elevated them in the hierarchy of compensation.
It was a co-pilot, to use a term that's used nowadays.
It was a co-pilot. This one is the first technology that will obsolete more jobs than it creates in counterbalance, right? 60% of all jobs today in the United States didn't exist 80 years ago. And I think this one is going to either automate, augment, or eliminate a lot of work, and it's predominantly going to be the knowledge worker domains. It's going to be it's coming for the intelligentsia. And we've never really seen this before. So the last thing I'll say, Steve, and then I'll stop for oxygen. This is a multiplication of intelligence. And I would go so far, Steve, as to say it's almost a speciation event. One of the co-founders at Anthropic talks about we're not so much building this as growing it. Mm-hmm. We're creating a non-biological intelligence that is in many ways superior to human intelligence. And if you look over all the course of biological and evolutionary history, Steve, we've actually never seen a less intelligent creature control a more intelligent creature. So we're proceeding with a lot of confidence, maybe even hubris in the face of this.
You're talking as humans, where we might be the less intelligent creature. There's so much to unpack here. Let's. And by the way, Anthropic is a Bessemer portfolio company. I think you're referring to Dario's paper, Machines of Loving Grace. So there's some optimism here, although there's some concerns to your point. If we create a new species that's more intelligent, then there's going to be obsolescence of jobs. But let me come back to healthcare for a second. So there have been other GPTs, and let's just talk you're in my lifetime, right? There's been the internet. Yep. There's been the move to cloud computing, I would argue. There's been the mobile phone. Those are probably the most three recent before this fourth GPT. Why has healthcare failed at adopting those?
So I think about healthcare, U.S. healthcare as, and look, I've not just dedicated, but like you, I've sort of consecrated my life to this. I love healthcare. I, yep. I feel such passion, and I feel such a privilege to it. So I'm going to say the following with a loving but very critical eye. I think U.S. healthcare is the single most oligopolistic, personality-dominated, hyper-regulated, hyper-incrementalist industry in the U.S. economy. And almost paradoxically, because it's $4.9 trillion, it's 17.3% of the US GDP, it is controlled by 150 personalities. I call them the Illuminati.
Illuminatis, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's this fascinating dynamic of, and let's define who they are. The 7 publicly traded managed care CEOs that on a good day have $1 trillion in market capitalization. Then it's the 33 Blue Cross Blue Shield CEOs that collectively insure 1 out of every 3 Americans, 119 million Americans. Then it's the 84 men and 16 women that lead the top 100 health systems that collectively comprise $936 billion in revenue out of the $1.6 trillion sector. And then we'll include the 10 biopharma CEOs with a $5 trillion market cap, and maybe put in Judy Faulkner for good measure as well. So 150 people. And healthcare has been impenetrable to these past paradigm technology shifts in our lifetime, Steve. Internet, mobile, social, cloud, big data and analytics, enterprise SaaS, blockchain. Healthcare's been not just a reluctant adopter, but I would characterize it as sort of an antagonist to a lot of these things.
Why?
Well, and the reason is, I'll be a little irreverent and I'll say it's embodied in 2 people, Mark Zuckerberg and Hippocrates. And like, I think about it as
do
like
no harm,
Mark Zuckerberg.
break shit fast. Is that right?
Break shit fast and first do no harm. Two totally orthogonal cultures, right? And the average CEO tenure in our industry is 3.9 years. The average age is 62 years. These 150 CEOs have known no other reality than being able to be super circumspect and sort of either wait out a tech revolution or just have it sort of like distilled down to like bite-size impact so we can metabolize it, right? And so when you've got regulatory sort of capture, like you do quintessentially in American healthcare, you're not rewarded for moving fast.
And so you talk about this disruption is coming to the greatest service area in the U.S. economy, which is healthcare. And
Yep.
We've got this Illuminati, these entrenched interests, this F-150 who are reluctant, circumspect to change, as you said. And then we've got all these outside technology forces, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, the Googles of the world that have looked at healthcare for a long time and seen trillions and trillions of dollars of market share and probably growth for their own core companies, but have failed miserably. And in your piece, I think you do a really good job of capturing is the disruption is going to happen in your mind? Is it going to happen endogenously or exogenously? If I said to you, Eric, today, sitting here today, April 25th, 2025, who wins? Is it the outside forces, the inside forces? Where would you place your $10 bet?
So right now, and this is really contradictory of what's happened in past GPTs, which tended to be built by iconoclasts that wanted to tear down the establishment and usually succeeded. And the incumbents today are these multi-trillion-dollar behemoths that a generation ago were founded in somebody's Silicon Valley garage, right? So normally what happens is that insurgents destroy the incumbents. Right. It's the classic innovator's dilemma. So far, this has been totally reversed. You know, first off, this is the biggest industrial mobilization since World War II.
What do you mean by that?
This year alone. Yeah. What I mean is that we're seeing a deployment of capital that we've never seen on this industrial scale since the end of World War II. I mean, this year alone, the four hyperscalers are going to spend $371 billion in CapEx.
That's crazy.
Right? Yeah. To resurrect decommissioned, nuclear reactors on 3 Mile Island. It's amazing. And then, it's one of the reasons why NVIDIA is a $3 trillion company because, $50,000 a pop for the GPU. So you're seeing this deployment of capital at a scale we've not seen. You need the deployable capital of a sovereign country or a multi-trillion-dollar hyperscaler to ante into the game. But the paradox is that the output, the models, are almost instantly commoditized, right?
Totally.
I mean, you saw almost 200 days between the release of GPT 3.5, ChatGPT, and then GPT-4. And then you just saw this telescoping of time with 4.0 came out, and then last October you had 0.1, and then 99 days later you had 0.3, and then you had deep research, and then you had operator, and now you've got memory. I mean, just the telescoping of the advancement, and this is the geopolitical issue of the day, and the fact that China, through distillation and imitation and its own super proficient engineers, can mimic. I mean, 2 years ago, there was about 20% distance in the notable frontier generalized models. Today, it's about 0.03%. Yeah. So you've seen complete convergence in the models. And so you've got this sort of paradox where it's the incumbents that, you need this massive artillery to finance this, but they're creating this beautiful scaffolding for insurgents to create, right? And so you asked a question. Let me try to land the plane here. U.S. healthcare as the most incumbent-dominated sector has an advantage. But incumbency is not an immutable law of nature. Incumbency is a head start.
Got it. So it sounds like if the incumbents take advantage or a head start, you would bet your $10 sitting here today on the incumbents beating the insurgents in healthcare. Is that fair?
Well, I think I'm going to reconcile the two, because I think I think there's going to have to be a marriage of the two, because the incumbents have the infrastructure, the regulatory navigation skills, the distribution, the credibility, and the insurgents have all the tech, have all the entrepreneurial energy, and have the sort of iconoclasm that they don't believe that you have to draw within the lines. And so, but it's not, we don't have a terrifyingly great record in terms of incumbents partnering with insurgents. Right. I mean, there were 13,000 digital health companies that got spawned during the pandemic in diagnostic, therapeutic, clinical, non-clinical workflow, care augmentation categories. I'm predicting, sadly, probably a 90% mass extinction rate. Why? It's not because they weren't super dynamic. It's that the incumbents proved super impenetrable. I mean, there was a study that showed that it took an average of 23 months, Steve, for once an incumbent signed a contract with a digital health company to deploy the solution. I mean, in this post-Cambrian explosion moment of multimodal foundation models, 23 months is like multiple lifetimes, right?
Yeah.
So the way I reconcile the two is that incumbents need to find a way to partner with insurgents. And there's a weaponization of some of the assets that the incumbents have. And one of the primary assets they have, Steve, is data. Right. Unstructured data. And I imagine we'll talk about that.
So you make a great point, which is actually, if you think about, incumbents, insurgents, and healthcare, this is the same thing when it came to the foundation models. And you call out that Satya, you think, is brilliant, because Satya was an incumbent. Microsoft had an incumbent position, but he decided to invest, to make a brilliant investment in OpenAI, and has changed that company, Microsoft and OpenAI, both together. So my question for you is, sitting here today, who do you think the Satya of healthcare is, to use the same analogy?
Yeah, and so I sort of challenged the 150, who, by the way, I have enormous regard for. I mean, these are some of the greatest executives in American industry that happen to also be pretty animated by some deep core principles. But most of them, Steve, are not going to make the turn. I think this is too discordant a moment. It's too alien a moment. I've spent a lot of time. I've probably done 40 board retreats with the 150 in just the last 6 months, in person and virtually. And I am noticing a real stratification. There are a few CEOs in the payers, the health systems, the med tech, and the life sciences companies that are breaking away from the pack, that are recognizing that this is a complete transformative tech, and that there is asymmetric advantage to whoever moves fastest. And I want to draw another quick important qualification, right? I'm talking about $1 trillion in CapEx, but the application layer right now, especially in healthcare, is super nascent.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And if I could be a little provocative, it's a little boring. It's ambient listening, it's summarization, it's documentation, it's coding. There's some proto-clinical AI applications. And this is not for a second to disparage some of the outstanding entrepreneurs that are in that pack. I was just with Shiv Rao from
he's a portfolio company of ours. Yeah.
Big fan of his. Yeah. And I think that it's a wedge.
He's got broader ambitions, for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
But right now, there's a real dichotomy between saying, "Hey, the most powerful technology in history," and ambient listening, right?
We're not there yet. And RCM, right?
RCM, yeah. And look, I'm a big believer in the transformation of our RCM. We at TowerBrook are, along with CD&R, the owners of R1, RCM, and I'm on the board and a big evangelist for this. And I think that's going to be a transformational company. But I will say that it's going to take some time for this to diffuse. But here's the insight. The insight is that even with the current embryonic application layer, it's revolutionary as it is. And it's for the following reason. The reason I think U.S. healthcare is so ready for disruption, there's 3 reasons, in fact. First, U.S. healthcare's labor addiction.
Right.
U.S. healthcare employs 21.7 million Americans. U.S. healthcare is the only industrial vertical that has seen negative productivity growth over the past generation. Steve, from 1970 to today, the number of doctors in the United States increased by 150%. From 1970 to today, the number of healthcare administrators increased by 4,000%.
It's crazy. 10 administrators for every one new doctor we had. Yeah.
And so my first assertion is that GenAI, when stripped of the dazzling generative elements, the fact that it won 2 Nobel Prizes on December 10th for chemistry and physics, the fact that you can go text to super photorealistic image or text to cinematic quality video and instantly get rid of all that. GenAI is about brute force productivity augmentation and the systematic substitution, task by task, occupation by occupation, of technology for labor. And U.S. healthcare has more superabundance of labor and unproductive labor. My second assertion is that the second reason that U.S. healthcare has the greatest surface area exposure to GenAI disruption is its data superabundance, right? So there's 150 zettabytes of data in the world. And a zettabyte's an abstraction, but maybe to make it a little bit more real, that's 402 billion gigabytes. A single ebook is 2.5 megabytes. So every hour, we're creating 139 billion ebooks worth of data. It's predominantly unstructured, and prior to LLMs with natural language processing, that data was inaccessible. So 1/3 of the world's data is in healthcare. It's increasing by 36% per year, and most of it, above 80%, is unstructured. So suddenly, it's accessible. You can tokenize it, you can dedupe it, you can normalize it, and suddenly you've got a super intelligence that can parse through your data, not just for pattern recognition and detecting anomalies. And then the last thing I'll say is, Steve, you and I talked about this, healthcare's past imperviousness to these tech phase shifts leaves it with a lot of accumulated tech debt.
Yes.
So,
question for you. I agree with you that probably we just put out a report at Bessemer on how different the payers, providers, and pharma world are adopting AI and where are they on their journey. We did it with Bain and AWS. Some really interesting insights out of that, which will also include the show notes. But, I'd say most people are early and reluctant, to your point. And so you mentioned that you've done a bunch of these retreats to different various leaders, about 40 of them. And you said there are pockets that are actually doing things. What are they doing? Like, what are they doing to start? What's your piece of advice of how you if you're the incumbent, how do you dip your toe in this water or maybe, start swimming pretty fast, to your point?
Yeah. And, in addition to the retreats, I've been bringing groups of these folks, I kind of irreverently call it on safari to San Francisco, where I'm starting to live part-time, got to be in the center of the revolution. And, meeting with the team at OpenAI, with Sam Altman and Brad Lightcap, meeting with Dario. So what I'm telling the 150 is that this is an autocratic decision. The CEO himself or herself has to be totally unambiguous that we are going to be a co-creator with this technology. We are not going to commit the sins of our predecessors, right? That abdicated the co-creation, co-invention, even the co-evolution responsibility. This technology is too powerful to leave to Silicon Valley.
Does that mean that common spirit, let's just pick a health system, for instance, that's a large health system, or HCA. Does that mean they're hiring engineers? Does that mean they're doing partnerships with OpenAI and Anthropic or a bridge? Like, what does that mean in your mind?
So, and I'm a big fan of Wright Lassiter and the Common Spirit team, and I had the privilege of speaking to their leadership team recently, and they are diffusing. I think Wright, and I want to speak for him, but my observation is he's trying to be declarative and say, this is a technology that's too important for us to sit on the sidelines for. And he's creating an environment where folks can experiment, where he can be vulnerable and say, here's how I'm incorporating this into my workflow. Here's how I'm learning about this. Here's some efficiencies I've learned that I want to share. And then almost democratizing that and making it safe, obviously with HIPAA compliance and data sovereignty and risks around data exfiltration. You got to put guardrails, but encouraging frontline and leadership experimentation with workflows, partnering with some external companies, really engaging with Silicon Valley and step stepping into that stream to understand what are the insurgents? What is this generation of AI and agentic native founders who are immersed in the tech, but don't know healthcare. They don't know the secret handshake. They don't know the hyper, litigious and regulatory landmines everywhere. And so I think it's about diffusing a lot of experimentation, almost, Steve, spreading and embedding in a horizontal, not vertical way. Really asking the questions, almost like what Toby Lubka did at Shopify.
Thank you. Another Bessemer company. Yes.
Big fan,
Yes.
Big fan. And that memo that first got leaked, and then he posted it that said, "Look, we're an AI first company here,
Yep.
right? We're growing 20 to 40% per year. That means that you have to grow 20 to 40% in your competence every year. Don't come to me and ask for a new hire, a new requisition until you've shown conclusively why AI can't automate, augment, or eliminate the task, right?" And I think that's sort of like orientation that, you want to make it safe for your frontline people to experiment. And because right now, Steve, there's this, I almost sort of call it BYO AI. There's this bring your own AI phenomenon to work. The more reactionary organizations have said, thou shalt not. But they're doing it anyway. By various studies, 75% of knowledge workers are using it. But they're not telling their bosses why, because they're worried that any productivity enhancements they get, their reward is they're going to get fired or they're going to get fewer hours. And now you've got a technology that will allow us to reconceptualize or eliminate entire functions. And that's kind of terrifying from, think about it this way. The average sticking with common spirit and health systems, the average not-for-profit health system spends 57 to 59 cents of every dollar
on labor,
on salary, wages, and benefits. Yes. HCA, pre-multimodal foundation models, spends 42 cents. I mean, and this is where we get to a really complicated acknowledgement. Healthcare and AI, GenAI specifically, is about labor reduction.
Right. And labor and these are the largest employers in each of our individual cities and towns that we live in. I mean, health systems, they have all the Illuminati from other industries, right? The car dealership owner, the government official, the local bank CEO, like everybody's on the health system board, and they're huge employers, and some of their workforce is unionized, and the unions are super powerful. So like, how does this play out, Eric? Because the world you're presenting is exactly right. That 56 cents on the dollar might become halved, and that's a lot of jobs, right?
And by the way, I think, and I'm reticent to put a numerical like prediction on this, but it needs to happen. I mean, there's a reason why we spend 2x what other OECD countries spend on healthcare in different outcomes. I mean, this is the best healthcare system in the world if you're rich and white. But if you're not, there's a lot of deep entrenched inequities in it. And when you look at other OECD countries, there's a misconception. We're not more expensive because of technology or intensity of utilization or overutilization. We are more expensive because of prices, which are directly correlated to labor intensity and how expensive labor is. I mean, one of the reasons that the first industrial revolution happened in Britain was because of the expensive labor. It was disproportionately more expensive in Britain than it was in continental
Can
Europe.
I push you on, and I want to go do some quick hits on how different parts of our ecosystem evolves. But on this point of you're calling out a sort of a clarion alarm that you need to adopt this technology and figure out how you're going to co-create, whatever your strategy is. You got to do it because insurgents are coming after you. But isn't there a world where incumbents who are frankly part of the Illuminati, they're in positions of powers in their local communities or nationally, might take a different strategy, which is like, let's set up shop on K Street, to your point, or the local, let's hire a local lobbyist and create regulation and barriers to this technology being operated just to save the jobs and save their job?
Yes. Yes. And this is what healthcare is professionalized in. Hand waving on 340B, site neutrality. I mean, that's been the go-to playbook for a long time. I am not sensing that. There will absolutely be folks that organize legislatively and regulatorily to decelerate this. I mean, you're going to see this especially on the clinician side, because, I mean, just yesterday it was revealed that Alibaba has released a medical superintelligence that, at least in pancreatic cancer, outperformed doctors, human doctors, by some 34%.
I believe it.
And it's been given breakthrough designation, evidently, by the FDA. I mean, think about clinicians as an example. There are 950,000 doctors in the country. Yeah. It is the most revered profession in the U.S., followed by nurses, followed by military veterans. It is the highest compensated.
Yes.
Highest compensated occupation in the country. 9 of the top 10 highest compensated occupations are medical. 20 of the top 25 in this country are medical. And I have reverence for doctors, but if I look at this as an economist, if you already have superhuman differential diagnostic capabilities, and you do, I mean, I brought a group to meet with OpenAI in October 4th, a group of CEOs, payer and provider and life sciences CEOs, and O1 was not in full release. There was a preview. And it was O1 Mini in the preview. We took a CPC, a New England Journal of Medicine clinical pathological conference, and one of the case studies, and took the diagnosis away and entered it into the O1 model. And with transparency, with interior monologue being shown, it demonstrated the chain of thought logic, and then arrived at the correct diagnosis, and then probabilistically assigned different differential diagnostic possibilities, and showed citations and showed its epidemiological reasons for it. And, the CEO of one of the largest health systems in the country, who happened to be an immunologist, said, they were pretty stunned. And one of the CEOs subsequently was quoted in Becker's as saying it was the most important meeting he'd attended in a decade, because it showed that the velocity of the tech, it's coming for the intelligentsia. It's coming for the most revered domain expertise areas. And I believe it'll be, I don't want to sound like a fearmonger. I think this is going to be societally a gift. It's going to democratize access in education, in healthcare. But if you look across history, you asked about GPTs, Steve. GPTs tend to be wonderful for society over time and very damaging for specific constituencies within those societies. And so I don't believe that the Illuminati are going to set up camp on K Street to oppose this. There will be a lot of that. But already I'm starting to see some super progressive CEOs among payers, among providers, among life sciences companies and med tech companies that are breaking ranks. I don't think this is going to be government driven, although I have enormous regard for Dr. Oz and Chris Klump at Medicare, who are really are leaning into this. And then, David Sachs and Sriram Krishnan, who are leading the AI regime for the United States. I think it's a prisoner's dilemma, Steve. I think you're going to see a few of the 150 break ranks, deploy the tech horizontally, ask themselves task by task, occupation by occupation, automate, augment, or eliminate. I think you're going to see some payers, anybody who has the premium dollar. Clinical AI, in my view, only works in a delegated risk environment. You have to have capitation because it's so orthogonal to the current reimbursement scheme.
So do you think AI actually helps the value-based care industry come out of the shitter, to use a crass terminology right now?
Brother, you and I agree. I don't believe in VBC. VBC is a myth. VBC has never existed. So the reason I say that is because I think a more exacting definition of VBC is capitation, downside risk, let alone full global downside risk. If VBC is a gratuity, which it has been, a couple of years ago, CMMI and CMS proudly pointed to $5 billion saved over a 5-year period. And to the layperson, $5 billion sounds like a big number, except when you think the average, that it's a $1.5 trillion annual budget. So multiply that across 5 years. I actually did the math. It's 0.0042%. It is microscopic. Now, I believe clinical AI will be a major tailwind for true VBC defined as risk, downside risk. Why? Because it is going to dramatically reduce medical loss ratio. I'll give you one example. We know that if you've got a medical issue with a behavioral comorbidity, your medical costs are increased by 2.5 to 6.7x. And suddenly, you've got a technology, a conversational AI, a chatbot, and this deep behavioral psychological truth of humans starts to come into play. Humans lie to other humans to avoid stigmatization, judgment, discrimination, embarrassment. But they will tell the truth to a chatbot.
Yep.
And is persistently available and is infinitely empathetic, infinitely patient, sycophantic, meaning it matches to Steve's personality or Eric's personality. So think about it this way. If we lose $500 billion a year because of pharmacologic non-adherence, if I start deploying a clinical AI and a chatbot to stimulate adherence, to stimulate ambulation if I'm not walking enough, or good dietary choices with computer vision to look at the food I'm eating, like clinical AI, I think is going to dramatically reduce medical costs because it's going to make us more preventive and preemptive. I personally think at maturity, Steve, we're going to go from 4 to 5% of the US healthcare dollar being consumed by primary care to 15 to 20%.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, and just 10 years from now, what are doctors learning in medical school? What does it look like?
So I think it's going to happen a lot faster.
Interesting.
Largely because, I almost think about it as like America innovates, Europe regulates, China appropriates. And I have enormous respect for China and the Chinese and just how industrious and brilliant they are. They are sprinting ahead in the deployment of autonomy in differential diagnostics. They will create the medical superintelligence faster than the United States will, not because of superior technological ability, not because of access to accelerated compute GPUs, because we've got export controls, but because there's less squeamishness and regulatory capture.
It's almost, it's a more blank sheet of paper.
I think, yeah. So I think it's going to be, we're going to have a medical superintelligence that's omniscient, that's recursively self-improving, that, what Dario talks about in that beautiful essay, Machines of Love and Grace, he talks about the compressed 21st century, a century of scientific and biomedical advances compressed into 5 or 10 years. And I think he argues very trenchantly. He says, look, all biological and biomedical advances come through polymathic discoveries that happen on average once every 18 months. And over the past generation, it's the mapping of the genome and X-ray crystallography and CAR-T and immunotherapy and CRISPR, right? Well, a lot of these existed in our knowledge years before. CRISPR, we've known around for a generation. If you have a virtual biologist that accelerates these inquiries, then we're going to compress biomedical advances and scientific accomplishments. So, Dario recently said, we're going to double human lifespan in the next matter of decades.
Do you believe it?
I believe that we are going to add decades to human life. I subscribe to the Ray Kurzweil notion of hitting escape velocity, longevity, escape velocity. And one of the reasons I'm so maniacal about my own health and being a teetotaler and trying to eat well and the rest of it is because I just got to survive for another 10 to 15 years. I'm 52 and I want to stay vibrant because in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have nanotechnology that are repairing our organs. We're going to have, think about it, medical education is still predicated on the 1910 Flexner Report.
Yep.
We still select medical candidates based on quantitative and memorization skills, which are profoundly obsoleted in a post-mature AI world.
Very rote. Very rote.
Typical primary care panel, Steve, is 1 to 2,000. And we have a scarcity and a geographic maldistribution of primary care doctors. Like, I think no scarcity of physicians, no geographic maldistribution, no 60-day wait.
You're saying with AI, all of these problems are solved.
That's right.
All right, my friend.
Right.
Well, listen, we could go on forever. Everyone could see you have a huge aptitude and interest and excitement about this. I think, listen, the last statement you made, the opportunity to extend human life by decade or two is amazing, but there's going to be some real near-term pain, it sounds like, too, in your mind. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing everything. It was an amazing conversation. I will point people to your fantastic report. Thank you for putting it out, and just really appreciate it. What a tour de force on the potential for AI to disrupt the landscape of healthcare.
Great to see you, my friend. Steve, super grateful to you and to Bessemer. And
thanks for listening to The Heart of Healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please leave a rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe. The Heart of Healthcare is produced by Hallie Tecco and hosted by Michael Esquivel, Steve Kraus, and Hallie Tecco. The show is engineered, edited, and mixed by Kyle Moore. Visit our website, heartofhealthcarepodcast.com, for show notes and details.
Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.